Hi, this is my new book called Armageddon. I'm going to read you the first chapter. Any thoughts are, of course, always welcome. Please fire in your thoughts. Chapter 1, Cold War, Berlin, Germany. It was cold. The first winter snow had fallen the night before, lying on the ground, almost lending a magical air to this place. But there was no magic to Observation Post Alpha. The sun had just begun to rise, its rays slowly creeping across the pre-drawn sky, as Major Morrison took his post at the top of the observation tower. Due to the events of the day before, he had been up for most of the last 24 hours. It was the height of the Cold War, and each day normally 40 men of the US 11th Armoured Cavalry, the Black Horse Regiment, stood but a chain-linked fence away from their East German counterparts. It was a tense posting, as the Fulda Gap, which OP Alpha overlooked, was expected to be one of the main arterial routes should the Russians choose to invade. It was important not only for its proximity to East Germany soil, but also as a radio monitoring and signals interception base. Late last night, however, 250 extra men had been rushed to the encampment, all to guard the man who had passed over the border. The observation post consisted of a line of towers, directly facing each other across a fence. On the Allies' side, behind these towers, lay a small compound consisting of nothing more than barracks for men and offices for signal processing. The position was designed for observation and early warning, not defence. Major Hank Morrison monitored his East German counterpart, his shadow, through binoculars. At 6'1" and 30 years old, this lanky, blonde-haired American presented quite a target for some East German to add to his buck wall. The occasional wave from across the border was not unknown, but it was more likely that should the shadow be in the mood, a potshot was coming his way. This did not worry the Major, as the post he was in was heavily reinforced with concrete, and he was standing behind two submachine guns permanently manned and pointed at the East German post. If they wanted some fun, then he would finish it. Being a veteran of the hot and sweaty jungles of Asia, this posting was actually quite a pleasant change. At the thought of Asia, a shiver went up his spine, and had nothing to do with the cold. He had started out life as Private Hank Morrison, but his continued fortitude and courage in battle had seen him rapidly promoted to sergeant. His valour on operations in the Haonang province had earned him first commission at the early age of 22, and a reputation within his regiment as one tough mother. Today was going to be a bit different. All his men were on high alert, as increased radio chatter and traffic intercepts suggested that something big was going to take place here today. The East Germans and Spetsnaz had been conducting training exercises close to the border over the past week, and some of these had spilled over, and short but brutal skirmishes had taken place between the Allies and the Red Army. All had ended in a quick retreat by the Red Army back over the border, but both sides had taken casualties. There was talk that these Russian exercises were to be a prelude to a full invasion of Western Europe. Anything was possible where the Russians were concerned, but what worried the Major, however, was that they were like to be used as an excuse to cross the border and attempt to take their guest back. It was 9 a.m. Morrison had been on post for around 3 hours. There was nothing to report so far. The cold was biting, and even though he was wearing fur-lined shoes and gloves, his fingers and toes felt like they were on fire, and he had lost feeling in his face within the first half hour of coming on duty. He turned to Lieutenant Marcus Kennedy and said, "It's time for a cup of joe and a chat to our guest. Report to me if you see anything suspicious at all." With that, Major Morrison turned on his heel and walked down the stairs to the office below. The sun had gently moved in its arc across the sky, shining directly into the observation post, temporarily obscuring the no man's land between both posts, making it hard to spot any movement on the ground below. As he sat with his cup of coffee, making his way through last night's reports, Morrison did not like it. If he were in the Ruskies' place, he would be in white camouflage, cutting through the flimsy chain fence that separated the borders, preparing to strike. Pressing a button, he called through to Sergeant Walker, asking for his guest to be brought in. A man of about 55 walked through the door. The man standing before him was none other than General Yuri Markov, who until yesterday was in charge of planning for the whole of the East German sector. Using the manoeuvres as a cover, he had managed to get to the Fulda Gap and move to a forward operating area escorted by only 3 very junior Russian soldiers. He grasped his opportunity to escape by eliminating his escort and slipping underneath the fence. This rather daring but undignified escape was watched from the Allied towers, and he was soon escorted into custody at gunpoint. Frankly, this gave Morrison a huge fucking headache. It was completely unexpected. It was not a common occurrence for high-ranking Soviet commanders to simply walk into your base. His calls up the chain had caused nothing but confusion, but he was left in no doubt that Markov was going nowhere until the CIA had interviewed him. Get him the fuck off my base, thought Morrison. We're only 200 yards from the enemy. We have one of their commanders. In hell, they'll want him back. But orders were orders. A man had arrived around an hour ago and was seated in his office when the Major entered. He didn't even move from his chair, but said, "Major, my name is Mr. Smith, and I am here to interview your prisoner," he said. "His information could be vital to us. It is your job to ensure that we are not disturbed. Do you understand?" Morrison only growled in response. "Oh, and Major, do you grasp the concept that I was never here? Now send him in." Standing, Morrison greeted General Markov. "Sir, may I offer you a cup of coffee or a cigarette?" The general took both, thinking that something stronger would be more appropriate, but beggars cannot be choosers. With that thought, a smile spread across his lips. "You find your predicament amusing?" "Not at all, Major," came his reply. "It's just as with all us Russians. I'm a bit of a fatalist, and I think that this time the game may end for me." Who is that gentleman to your left?" "That, sir, is Mr. Smith, and as far as I'm aware, we are the only 2 people in the room." Thinking, Morrison took a long, hard look at the man before him and saw that he believed what he said. They would be coming for him, and he would have to be ready. "Now, General," continued Morrison, "I trust that your quarters are to your satisfaction, and I'm authorized to tell you that we will grant you asylum and welcome you to the West, but you have created one hell of a pickle, sir. I have, as of last night, 250 men under my command, whose purpose is to guard you. I don't mind telling you that we are 200 yards away from your previous comrades, and should they wish to take you back, well, they'll have a hell of a fight in their hands, but if they come in force, then there's nothing but luck which will prevent them having you back. So, why have you not moved me? I have important information to tell you, Amerikansky, Major. I have risked my life and limb to get here. I have troop dispositions, and the general invasion plan should it happen. What could be more important to the West? I have left my fucking family to get you, and now this." "General Markov," replied Major Morrison, "I have my orders, and they are for you to remain here while Mr. Smith evaluates your story. Once this is done, we can move you securely to Berlin. Believe me, I want you out of here as soon as possible, as not just your ass on the line." Losing his temper slightly, Markov stammered that the information that I possess must get into the right hands. The fate of the world hangs in the balance, and all I can do is wait in the middle of nowhere with a man who does not exist. What madness is this? Throwing his coffee aside, he asked, "Do you have anything stronger?" Morrison just shook his head and took his leave. Outside the door, he motioned to the guard. "Take care of the prisoner. I want you to double the guard and break out the rifles. It may get a bit sporty here quite soon. I want a detail of sandbags on either side of the corridor, as well as the machine gun set up outside the door. Your only orders are to protect the prisoner until I get back, at whatever the cost. Do you understand?" The guard saluted, double-timed it up the corridor. Morrison just turned on his heel and went in search of Kennedy. Finding him exactly where he'd left him, they both popped down to the canteen for a chat. "Our guest is currently billeted in my office. If something comes, I do not expect a full assault, but rather a small incursion force with orders to seek and destroy. But I've been wrong before." Okay, it's 0930. By 0950 I want the 1st and 2nd platoon covering east and west of the fence, with 3rd covering the middle. It's cold out there, so I want them in their whites. The white uniform allowed the men to blend in with the snow, and it also allowed them to keep warm in the blistering cold weather. I also need our spotters to go eyes on and make sure that the rabbits do not get through the fence. How many armoured personnel carriers do we have? 5 M2 Bradleys, sir, came the reply. The M2 Bradley was mainly a personal carrier, but had a 25mm cannon which fired up to 200 rounds per minute, and at 33 tons it could provide a formidable obstacle to any attacking force. Okay, move the APCS. I want 3 in the middle, 1 on the left, 1 on the right. We can use them to protect our troops and to harass anything that might come through the fence. As well as that position, fire teams at each corner surrounding my office. Yes, sir, said the lieutenant, and went to turn away to carry out his orders. Morrison stopped him and... Lieutenant? Yes, sir. I want them loaded for bear. I want them ready for anything that might come their way. With everything seemingly falling into place, Morrison moved back onto the gantry and began scanning the fence line. The fence itself was nothing more than chain link with a few flares to ward of intrusion. It was designed to mark boundaries rather than keep people out. That was left to the men and the force behind it. The trick, his instructor had taught him in basic training for conditions like these, was not to look for the men themselves, but to look for glints coming from scopes, or improperly squared away ammunition, or for the trails left by the men as they stealthily made their way across the snow. Reminding his men of this, Morrison redoubled his effort on the fence.